Good afternoon, namaste. Greetings from UNESCO New Delhi to our distinguished panelists, partners, and members of the audience. On behalf of UNESCO New Delhi, I'd like to welcome all of you to the third edition of our webinar taking place under the Resili Art, which is the global movement launched by UNESCO in order to mobilize solidarity among the artists, artisans, and professionals in the cultural sector during this pandemic crisis. So far, 76 Resili Art webinars have taken place in 39 countries, and many more will follow in the near future. By replicating the Resili Art in the region, UNESCO New Delhi very much would like to ensure that voices of artists are heard at the policy level, but also to facilitate the process for development of policies and financial mechanisms to help and empower those who have been suffering in creative and cultural sector from this pandemic. The present session is the second one of the webinar series dedicated to living heritage being organized by UNESCO New Delhi office in cooperation with banglanatak.com. The first webinar in this living heritage series, which was held last week, was about building resilience in the communities, practicing intangible cultural heritage. The panelists, including Principal Secretary of the Tourism Department from Rajasthan and others from different corners of the region, such as Bangladesh, India, Nepal, as well as Germany, shared their situation, but also put forward some solutions. The talk also considered it would be important to take this crisis brought by this pandemic should be well used to build resilience among the communities, as this kind of disaster can well occur in the future also. Today's webinar, entitled New Paradigms in Rural Cultural Industries, is a continuation of the first one and will explore questions such as how can digital technology offer new possibilities? What are the pathways for de-risking existing business models? And also, we will also try to see potentials of the program such as Vocal about local for opening up new markets and possibilities for communities of intangible cultural heritage. To this end, we invited 5 panelists who are leading figures in India's living heritage and the tourism sectors, as well as IT technology. We hope that these webinars will come out with a set of recommendations to help decision makers and the private institutes to develop suitable policies and financial mechanisms, which will then to help artists and artisans to recover from this difficult period and also enhance the resilience of creative expressions. UNESCO New Delhi looks forward to continuing our efforts to disseminate the Resili Art movement and its spirit in the region in cooperation with all of you. I'd like to thank our panelists and audience for your interest in this webinar and wish you all the best for constructive discussion. Before ending my introduction, I'd like to present to all of the audience here an online survey launched by UNESCO headquarters, as well as its dedicated web platform to exchange. And this is established by UNESCO to exchange and document experiences of living heritage during the pandemic crisis, both in terms of impact and the diverse ways communities interact each other to overcome the crisis. So we would like to invite all of you to kindly take part in this online survey. Thank you very much. Dhanyavad, shukriya.
We're indeed in a new normal times when every day we are finding out about new ways of living and working. Today our objective is to hear the voices of the grassroots of the rural cultural industries, which encompasses the handicraft sector, our fairs, our festivals, our cultural tourism. And for that, in the last few weeks, we have been talking to craftsmen, to folk artists across the country.
শোনো শোনো হয়া গো দয়াল তোমায় জানাবো কেমনে করোনা ভাইরাসের প্রায় 35 বছর ধরে এই কাঁথা কাজে যুক্ত আছি, কিন্তু আমি আমার জীবনে এই প্রথমবার শিল্পীদের নিয়ে খুব সমস্যায় আছি। কারণ হলো লকডাউনের জন্যে আমরা কোথাও যেতেও পারছি না এবং আমাদের কাছে কেউ আসতেও পারছে না।
তাহলে আজকে আমাদের লেনদেন যদি ঠিক মতো না করতে পারি, তার জন্য আমাদের আর্থিক অবস্থা খুবই খারাপ।
এরকম অবস্থা থাকলে, এরকম অনুষ্ঠান বিভিন্ন জায়গায় ইনকাম সোর্স না থাকলে দল টিকানো বড় মুশকিল। শুধু দল বলে নয়, এই শিল্পটাই আস্তে आस्ते हारिए गए।
22 मार्च बहुत दिन याद रहेगा। जब हम चौराहे पे चले गए तो लोगों ने कहा लॉकडाउन लग गया, कहाँ जा रहा भैया। तो स्थिति ऐसी थी कि कोई घर में ऐसा बवाल हो गया जैसे वीरान हो गए सब, बस्ती और बहुत सारे हमारे जजमान लोग यहाँ के जितने भी है। सबसे बड़ी बात यह है कि इस गांव में 250 कलाकार हैं, उनका पालन पोषण कैसे हो।
कलाकार तो कोई साधारण भूषण भी नहीं होते, वो तो भी देश का तो एक बहुत बड़ा एक हिस्सा होता है कलाकार।
सरकार से हम सब कसिंदा काम करने वाले आशा करते हैं कि हमारी लाइट, पानी, स्कूल फीस सरकार माफ करे, हमें राशन सामग्री की व्यवस्था करे, हमें कम ब्याज पर लोन दिलवाए या सब्सिडी पर लोन दिलवाने की, जिससे हमारा कसिंदा कार्य बंद ना हो और हम हमारा घर परिवार चला सकें।
আমরা চাই সমস্ত লজগুলি খুলুক, টুরিস্ট আসুক, আমরা সামাজিক দূরত্ব বজায় রেখে আমরা আমাদের प्रोग्राम देखिए किसी इनकम करते चाहिए।
हम लॉकडाउन में थे लेकिन हमें महसूस नहीं हो रहा था कि हम लॉकडाउन में हैं या हम एक अपना काम कर रहे हैं। तो हम घर में रह के और खाली नहीं रहे, अपना काम करते रहे, अपनी परंपरा का लेखा जोखा करते रहे, अपनी परंपरा पे लिखाते रहे, रियाज करते रहे, फेसबुक के जरिए लाइव प्रोग्राम कराते रहे।
তো ভেঙে পড়ার কিছু নেই। সাধক ভবা পাগলা এক জায়গায় বলেছে যে নিজের সাধনাটা করতেই হবে, তো আমাদের চর্চা চালিয়ে যেতেই হবে। তাই সাধক ভবা পাগলা কি বলেছেন আমি সুরে একটুখানি বলবো। তুমি ভাঙো আবার তুমি গড়িয়া তোলো অসীমের শূন্য আকাশে প্রকৃতির প্রদীপ জ্বালো।
So that gave us a glimpse of the concerns the rural cultural industries are facing, and also the inherent resilience and power of the sector. You know, the beauty of this sector for all of us who are working with this is that every moment we realize how it embraces economic, cultural, and social aspects. You know, the sector actually creates identity for people, and essentially our cultural traditions, our heritage, and this whole sector of cultural industries and cultural tourism are bearing messages of peace, messages of diversity. So it's very important that this sector gets necessary support. Unfortunately, we know it is not a priority sector. Till date, we're not hearing of any policies, programs, and I'm not talking only of government, but in general, from the entrepreneurs, from the industry, what is needed is, you know, how can this sector, which is suddenly facing this loss of demand, loss of audience, owing to the difficulties posed by the pandemic, how that will survive. And it is not only an issue of mobility, it is not only an issue of lockdown, but it's also an issue of the inherent fear and the inherent insecurity which is dominating. So today our first speaker is Mr. Tarun Bansal. Over to Tarun. I'd like to hear from you.
It's anybody's guess how we come through these tough times. We have to sit it out. We were possibly the first to get hit and probably the last to come back. If you talk about India, international tourists will return in any numbers only after a vaccine is found, and possibly by March or April 2021. Domestic tourism may start sooner, depending on how the confidence builds up, how the numbers of the cases lessen. It's not just the disease, it's also the fear perception and the anxiety around jobs and earnings that will affect tourism for a long time. It's difficult to say that, I keep hearing words like revenge tourism. I don't know what to say. It's difficult for tourism to come back if there's a lot of anxiety around jobs and earnings, forget health. So with this, I would say that tourism will take a long, long time to come back. And industries that are based on tourism to survive will be taking a hit, including folk arts and crafts. Traditionally, artists have been dependent on judgments or patrons. That is gone. However, I heard something very interesting in a conference in Goa that I was invited thanks to Bangla Natak. Every era reinvents itself, and I think that's so true. Every era reinvents itself. We have to reinvent ourselves and see how we take it on. Income from hotels, camps, local festivals, and for sometimes international festivals, I don't think it will come back any soon. If you talk about the crisis that the folk communities, I've worked primarily with music, with folk music in Rajasthan. So I would speak more from my understanding with my work with them. If you talk about the crisis that communities find themselves, let's keep tourism aside for a while. It's more to do with institutional shortcomings rather than COVID. Communities for a long time have been producing excellent artists. Many of them have been earning a lot of money. But if you go to the villages, there are no schools. Women empowerment, many of the musicians themselves say that our women sing better than us. But women are not allowed to sing. So I think lack of education, lack of enlightenment about things like insurance, lack of technological knowledge, that affects the communities, that makes them more vulnerable. See, we've had a good season. If you talk about tourism, coming back to tourism, we've had a good season. We earned well till February, March, and then the crisis struck us. But it's disheartening to go to these villages and see that despite even popular, internationally acclaimed artists, if you go to the villages are not in a good shape. Communities are not made up of 50 artists who have an international acclaim or who are invited to festivals all over. There are some people in the community that can't sing. The traditional patrons support everybody. Unfortunately, the folk festival or the international festival or the tourism industry doesn't do that. If we don't support the community, we are breaking away from the ground that may give rise to fantastic artists, possibly from households whose parents cannot sing. So that sort of an institutional shortcoming, I think, is striking, and that should be looked at first. When we talk about opportunities as tourism comes back in whichever form it comes back, see, pilgrimage is also a tourism. We have to look at local, then we have to look at the state, then the metros, and then international. We have to change the gaze. It has to become inwards. We have to provide even when we talk about tourism, we have to provide a ground, look at ways in which we are able to give a platform for folk arts, starting from their local communities. And in a way, it is a blessing in disguise because these local communities understand this music. A foreigner coming from Switzerland or Germany doesn't. For them, there is more of an exotic value, a different sound that attracts them. But if we are able to make a background in which the performances are supported locally, it will be a great thing. Because the music or the young artists that will be trained there, that gain confidence on these local stages, would go on. So possibly we may need 50 of such festivals like Mombasa has, or like Bangla Natak does so well. First local, then national, then international. We need to look at interesting, innovative solutions, taking help of technology. If we do not develop what I say Gunijan, if we do not develop people who understand music, the music doesn't live. Local theaters, local stage give that opportunity. Also, if we can use technology to possibly train people in using folk instruments through online classes. Imagine Khartal or Bhapan being taught online. And anybody all over the world can look at them. If they're inspired, they learn such things. So we can look at music residencies for young students, for colleges. So use technology, use the artistry and the mastery of these folk artists, and then give them a platform.
Thank you, Tarun. In fact, Tarun has touched upon two important topics. Even WTO is talking of this, that share culture today for travel tomorrow. And in that sharing of culture, technology will play a big role, because what we have found already that, the OTT sector or the digital sector is doing good because they have a captive audience and there's lack of content, and definitely lack of content on our cultural industry or creative sector or our heritage sector. So I'll now request Pankaj to speak. Pankaj is going to talk today about how they're planning to use augmented reality, geofencing, multimedia to enhance a visitor experience. So over to Pankaj.
Right, thanks Ananya, pleasure to be here. So I'll be providing a technology lens, the digital lens, to how we are addressing this problem of lack of promotion and preservation of tangible and intangible heritage in the country. But before I start, I think what I figured also in my experience over the last couple of years is that people, general audience, they typically interchangeably used augmented reality and virtual reality as in terminology perspective. So just to give a quick clarity on that, augmented reality, simply put, adds digital elements to a live view. So using your camera of your smartphone, you can actually add digital elements and interact with that. So that's augmented reality. Some of the examples that you would be using already would be Snapchat or Pokemon Go, Google AR Animals of the new entry during the lockdown period, which Google has released. Virtual reality, in contrast, provides a completely immersive experience. So you have those headsets that you put on, and when you wear a headset, that shuts out the physical world and you're in an immersive computer-generated environment, and then you tend to interact with the virtual objects over there. So that's the primary difference. Our project use case primarily uses augmented reality, because why we chose augmented reality was primarily from a bigger problem statement where we figured that the World Heritage Sites, the cultural ones in India, despite their scale and grandeur, lacked authentic and accurate interpretation of the built heritage. And so what you typically, and most of you can relate to it, when you go to a monument or a heritage site, what you do encounter is that you'll get hounded by tour guides. Most of them are not certified. And if you end up hiring a tour guide, be rest assured you'll get some healthy doses of fictitious information, just because they would want to make your experience interesting, right, in that sense, but which is not really good. And besides that, you have the dialect, diction, and the soft skill issues which come with it. Then some of the monuments we figured had audio guides, the traditional hardware, the black devices with a headphone, and they had their own set of challenges of not being scalable. There was a maintenance issue, pilferage issue. They want security deposits, kind of a deterrent in that sense. And then we figured that there were some audio apps which were there, and some of them have fantastic production quality, I would admit. But what we figured that the coverage of content was still not as deep as one would like. Right? So more so the apps are, I would believe, for a niche audience, because the language used in the narration clearly requires a high level of proficiency, and therefore is not for the masses in that sense. So with these problem statements in mind, we approached the good offices of Archaeological Survey of India, and we explained how with our experience in content development and technology, we can build these kind of experiences, which could be for the masses, it could be in vernacular languages, and if they can give us access to their archives, which are relatively open archives, we can basically get the right interpretation out, which is one of the bigger problem statements that we are facing. So ASI supported us by giving us access to their the ASI monuments across the country to do video photo shoots. Obviously, their archives were accessible. We were also helped in a way by UNESCO office informally by they got us introduced to the knowledge partners who were working with the UNESCO and creating the dossiers for the heritage sites. So we started with, like I said, the built heritage, how you do the right interpretation on your smartphone with multimedia synchronized narration. There's augmented reality where the visitors are interacting with the points of interest, and I'll show you in the consecutive slides how we're trying to do that. Show some screens. We said that we would want to extend the platform because from experience also I love to travel. Once you've seen the built heritage, and that's where you typically start, you want to experience the local flavor of the region, and that's where the local art, the craft, the culinary delights, the music, all of that really comes in play. And for that, the community plays a very important role, the host community, right? And what we figured was that in most cases, the tourism dollars were not really reaching the host community. So what was happening was that there's a middle layer of businesses which are really procuring the unique products or services from the local community at a very nominal cost, and they're selling it at a huge profit. So our intention was, if there was a way that we could connect the travelers to the community, and what we typically do is we've extended the platform in building self-guided walks, wherein you go to in the vicinity of the site, you go on a specific trail, there is a map, and while you're on that trail, you get your narration in vernacular language, but we also geotag the community businesses. Now that what that really is doing is that it's completing the experience of the traveler, where they get to connect with the community and see what kind of local art or craft or culinary delights are happening there. They also buy stuff directly from them. In extension, we are also providing the communities with the online curated marketplace. So the products or services which are unique to their region, they can actually push all of that onto the platform. So it's a more sustainable livelihood model that we are trying to evolve while preserving and promoting the intangible cultural heritage of a region. So that's the other second spoke. And the third spoke that we're trying to do is there's a school outreach program, because we realize that the kids these days, they go to a heritage site, it's more like a picnic spot for them or a photo opportunity. And so we have, because we have authentic content now, we approached Macmillan Education, who's our partner in this entire initiative, and we created multidisciplinary activity books. It's also in alignment with the latest ICT guidelines, where you move away from the traditional rote learning methodology to more experiential learning pedagogy, right? So there's an activity book and there's a related app experience of a monument. And we're trying to evolve the UNESCO sites as knowledge dissemination zones. So to give you some examples, if you're at the Qutub complex, we talk about the iron pillar not rusting, then the concept of metallurgy comes in play. If you're talking about domes and squinches, geometry comes in play. If you're talking about the Taj Mahal, it's going green, yellow, air quality index comes in play. So that's how the entire thing is panning out. And what we also did is we tried to align our mandate with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the built heritage interpretation is aligned to 11.4. We have 8.9 for sustainable livelihood and 4.7 for education. So that's what we're trying to do with this project, so to say.
Our next speaker is Dr. Debanjan Chakraborty. I'll now invite Debanjan to share his perspective.
Hi everyone. Thank you UNESCO, thank you Bangla Natok for inviting the British Council to be part of this really important conversation, Resil Art, and the conversation around culture and crafts around COVID-19. British Council, as some of you may know, is the UK's international organization for cultural relations and education opportunities. And we've been working in India for over 70 years now. And there are three things that British Council essentially does. We create connections, we work in the cultural space, and we create conversations. So connections, culture, and conversations are at the heart of what we do. And thank you, Anuna, in particular, for highlighting the kind of some of the work we have been doing. And we are really grateful that we've had this opportunity to work with Bangla Natok, and we have worked with folk musicians, and we've worked on Sur Jahan and folk nations in particular. We've worked on folk art, wood carving. So we have supported a project with Bangla Natok around wood carving. For the last few years, we've been working quite closely with Bangla Natok and a UK partner of ours called Bengal Heritage Foundation. And we have showcased folk musicians, Baul musicians who we heard in the initial video. We have showcased Kantha stage artists in London. We have taken Madur crafts people to London with help of Bangla Natok and Bengal Heritage Foundation. And not just in London, but across 3 locations this year. Fagun Fest work had impact in London, in Cardiff, and in Dublin. I think our work in the crafts, in the entire culture and education space aligns with 2 of the 17 UN SDGs quite centrally. One is around quality of education, which is SDG number 4, and SDG number 5, gender equality and inclusion. But our work also thematically and across the world touches upon number 8, which is around livelihoods and employment opportunities. And partnerships, I think, is at the heart of everything that we do. So that's number 17 on the UN SDGs. And a quick sort of background on the entire craft sector globally and in India. The total net worth of the craft sector worldwide is around 400 billion US dollars. Unfortunately, in India, the share of India in that craft sector is surprisingly low, only 2% of that total pie. In India, there are, we estimate, and these are figures from the Crafts Council of India, that there are 14 million crafts people working in that sector, and 56% of these are women. So, which has really, these things have really helped align the focus of our arts work around 2 major clusters. One, Anuna, as you rightly mentioned, is around festivals. So it's festivals of the future, and the other is around crafts. It's called Crafting Connections, and they are kind of interlinked ideas. And capacity building is right at the heart of these 2 pillars. It's not simply about showcasing UK art sector and craft sector, but it's also about capacity building. It's about mutuality and an equal partnership between Indian craft sector and their UK counterparts. So our crafting, I'll focus a little bit more on the crafting futures side of our work. This is a project that started in 2018. It has got capacity building and improving of economic and livelihoods of Indian craft sector at its heart. It's got a strong gender focus as well on women. Within that, within Crafting Futures, there are 4 distinct pillars. The first one, unsurprisingly, is about supporting women. And so women in the crafting communities and in the social enterprise network, and craft studios and what have you. The second pillar of our Crafting Futures work centers around innovation in business. And this is largely around design and new business models, and it's probably not yet technology as Pankaj had mentioned, and that's very exciting kind of things that Pankaj laid out. The third thing is around new technologies, and this is around crafts production, which are sustainable and future-proof. So those are some of the ideas we are exploring in our work in crafts. And finally, and this is what I think Tarun had mentioned, and this also relates largely to the work that Sanjoy, I know, does, which is around the whole tourism sector. So safeguarding and developing the crafts tourism sector work. I'll get into a little bit more detail on this, but I also wanted to quickly flag up a very interesting research project. So research underpins all our work, and we are quite data and evidence driven. We have, at the invitation of the West Bengal government, undertaken a very interesting and exciting piece of research around the creative economy worth of the Durga Puja festival in West Bengal. This is being led by the Queen Mary University of London and supported by IIT Kharagpur. And the research is coming to an end. We are looking at some of the data and sharing that with the West Bengal government. But one of the real highlights of that is so there are 5 aspects to that research, one of which is the tourism sector. So the connection between Durga Puja, the 10-day festival in West Bengal, and tourism is very, very robust. And one of the real interesting stuff that has come out in the early stages of the research is that 80% of the craftspeople involved in Durga Puja, 80% of that earning come from just those 10 days of Durga Puja. So there are these sort of events that are, have these pulsar effects. And I think JLF is another great example of a pulsar effect in the festivals domain. I think it's quite interesting to hear from Pankaj about soft skills and language issue, because in our crafting futures work, connecting the communities to markets is a very, very important aspect. And this is something we would want a wider conversation with the entire sector. I think Bangla Natok we've been working with, but would like to invite more and more partnerships across India on how can we connect the craft sector in India to wider opportunities globally. And I think soft skills and even English language is quite an important and interesting aspect of that, and we have some expertise there from other sides of our work to offer. One of the very interesting projects that we did under Crafting Futures was a residency program that was based out of Tripura. We worked with a Tripura-based designer and a UK-based designer, and in partnership with IMG Reliance and the Fashion Week in Mumbai. And the other response that we have had more recently, addressing the question of post-COVID kind of conversations and addressing the question of resilience. So with an NGO called Impulse NGO and social enterprise based out of Shillong, we had a webinar, and again, stimulating that conversation between the craft sector, especially in the Northeast, which has its own connectivity issues, both literally and metaphorically, with India and rest of the world. So I think those are some of the things we have been working on. The other research that my colleague Jonathan Kennedy is leading on is taking the temperature survey. So this is a partnership with FICCI and Artex Foundation and Crafts Village and ourselves. So we are trying to gather some data on how the craft sector is faring within in this sort of challenging times during COVID. And again, we hope that this data will make some difference once we gather that data and share it more publicly.
Now, we have been talking of craft, and we have with us Neelam Chipar. Over to Neelam to hear from her.
Thanks, Ananya. So happy to be here. Happy to meet all the panelists. Always great to learn. I like the film that you started off with. So yes, there is going to be a huge impact on COVID in this sector. It's completely underestimated. And I think one of the biggest issues this sector has always had is its number count. How many people, right? So it was great. It was great to hear Debanjan say 14 million, right? But you may have noticed that we all talk about 200 million artisans. That is just being used as a shock It's a provocation, right? That today there is just no sense at all. And we know the amount of hard work Crafts Council of India and all these senior advocacy organizations have been doing with the Office of the Statistics at central government, also on the census front, to really try to get a number. There was an article in the Hindu 3 days ago on the hill broom makers of Nagaland. So right from making a hill broom is a traditional production, cultural, creative practice. So if you will include, because you see, it cannot be 14 million. So the 14 million are numbers of producers who are doing maybe more acceptable in consumer terms craft. But India was a 100% self-sufficient economy 250 years ago, pre-industrial revolution. We made everything for our own consumption. The largest contributor to Indian GDP pre-independence was the creative manufacturing sector, which is why it was not agriculture. Today it's agriculture, but pre-industrial revolution, it was this sector. And therefore, I believe that in COVID, post-COVID, the criticality is that the whole sector needs an overhaul. So the systemic issues at least start leaving us. And what COVID brings is a much larger problem. It's a much larger problem. And again, to go with Tarun's advice, that yes, our only way is going to be going local, which is also a topic of this panel. So I will just keep my comments. I split my comments into, I will talk about technology in the second instance you give me. Right now, I'll just focus on the fact that if we want to have anything to do to improve the situation, we just need to remember that finally the government has a count that they have ferried 60 lakh, that's 6 million migrants back on trains in the last 4 weeks. So now they have a number. Now, who are these migrants? Why did they migrate to the city in the first place? Right? So they were farmers, they were landless labor, they were from artisanal backgrounds. So let's just go back as to what is the composition of an Indian village. Right? So because there was no work for these people, you have built this massive skilling ecosystem and you're reskilling them because you believe that this is a sunset industry. Right? So your policies are a little flawed. So you push them all out to become domestic workers, construction labor, and informal workers. 93% of our Indian workforce is in the informal sector. 93%. They have no social security, they have no health insurance. The quality of life and the standard of living is 3 times in a city as compared to a village. Yeah, so so let's now talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat. Let's talk about this opportunity COVID presents to us. Let's talk about regenerative economies. Today it's COVID, and COVID is not going to go away by March 2021. COVID is here for the next couple of years, right? And after COVID, it's something else. And what is that? That's global warming. We are already 3 degrees past the trigger. By 2050, Bombay will be underwater. So, how is India going to pull its millions out of poverty? How is it going to reach its 8%, 10% growth unless it is building a regenerative economy? So now we talk about this sector. First of all, we stop calling the sector craft. We call the sector creative manufacturing. This is about manufacturing. It's about production. It's about competitiveness. It's about quality. It's about productivity, right? Which is ignored in the whole discussion around culture. Culture is it's a most critical part of this. but it's not the only part of this. So let's start by calling it cultural creative manufacturing. And the last number I usually give people, because that's the only way this will affect any policy change or any thought process, is even if we were to take the 14 million number, 14 million artisans, if you want them all to earn above minimum wage annually, minimum wage annually is 100,000 rupees, 8,000 rupees a month. That is $1,500. If you double $1,500, because the wage element is $1,500, so raw material is another $1,500, is $3,000. You multiply 3,000 with 14 million, you get close to 30 to 40 billion. 300 to 400 billion of revenue that this sector needs to create. Yeah. So you cannot hope that this will be niche marketing, that people buy as a decor item or as a curio item or out of interest. No, this is about consumption, right? So therefore, this sector can become a vehicle of sustainable consumption, right? And it can become the foundation of regenerative economies. And India can take a lead on that, because with the Chinese form of production, that was the migration model. So why is India imitating the Chinese model? So these are the things that one needs to speak with the government about, and how to do it and what are the models is something I'll share in my next round.
Thank you, Neelam. So now over to Sanjay, and Sanjay, you're the doyen of events and festivals. So he's an entrepreneur of the arts and the managing director of Teamworks. And we all know about the Jaipur Literature Festival. Sanjay has also received National Award for Excellence and Best Director for the film Shah Jahanabad, The Twilight Years. His Salam Balak Trust is working with street and working children at Delhi. He's been awarded for that. Now, I was reading an interesting survey done recently by the Event and Entertainment Management Association, of which Sanjay is a president. And what we find there is that in these few months, 90% of business has been cancelled for 53% of the company. And 60% of them faced revenue losses high revenue losses, and even retrenchment and job loss is a challenge for 50 to 80%. So Sanjay, we'd really like to hear from you. What will happen to events and festivals? When we are barred from social gathering, our cultural spaces are closed, what will happen?
Thank you, Ananya. And I hope that even post this, we have a conversation with your organization. I'm very interested in doing some stuff. And Banjan, I've already sent you an email on this. And of course, thank you, Juni and UNESCO, for making all of this happen. I just thought I'd react to some of what everybody said. I'm sorry, before I get to answering Ananya's question, if that's okay, Ananya. Just a couple of things. One is, I want to put on record that, in the 70s and the 80s, up till the early 2000s, the haves and the have-nots were really divided based on our access of public schools and the universities and colleges we went to, and the choice of language, or the communication, in this case, English, that we had access to, which allowed us then to do research projects or be part of international symposiums or conferences such as this. Pankaj, the problem is that going forward, and even now as we speak, the haves and have-nots are, the haves are you have bandwidth, and the have-nots are that you don't have bandwidth. And that is going to become an enormous challenge, where even in a city like Delhi or Calcutta, you don't have access to be able to upload your product, your work, your, whatever you've done. So in that case, in this supposedly democratization of the public platform for arts, crafts, performance, etc., what democratization are we looking at? What education are we looking at online, where none of this is possible, barring those of us who have routers or access to smartphones? And I would really like all of us to look at this very in some detail, because it is a problem, and we're already seeing this to be a growing problem, even as we ask artists and artisans to upload their 1-minute videos or their craft to be able to help get money and support to them through the many platforms that I'm part of, primarily because I've got long hair, and that's the reason I get invited to conferences like this. So that's one. The second thing I would really, and I would love Junie to take this and put this on record, is that can we please change the aspect that we keep talking about social distancing. India's always had social distancing. We've socially distanced from caste, color, religion, creed, and so on and so forth. It's an age-old practice. Even today in New Moti Bagh, which is where much of India is governed from, you have a separate line at the place you go to buy your supplies, separate for servants and separate for supposed owners. We know that between religions, that's always been a practice, and certainly with caste. So to say that this is social distancing at many degrees just reinforces what I think all of us collectively at some point have been pushing against. The third thing that I want to really focus on is we know the problems. We know COVID ain't going. We know how the polio vaccine has taken 5 decades to roll out across India. I don't see any reason why the COVID vaccine, as and when it'll come by, will be any different. The problem that we have is that, unfortunately, the communicators and those in the seat of power used fear to be able to change the narrative. And perhaps they thought by the clanging of vessels and lighting of lamps, COVID would agree that they wouldn't cross the Delhi-Gurgaon border, or wouldn't cross the Bengal-Bihar border, or wouldn't cross whatever. But hey, COVID seems to have a mind of its own, and it refuses, I'm sure much to Pankaj's dismay, refuses to apply for an e-pass online using AR or any other technology that is available. So therefore what? I think that's where the arts is well poised, to be able to push back on fear and hatred. And fear and hatred today is far more the killer that we have seen, whether it's on the roads, whether it's on trains, or whether it's with the daily wage workers. And I will not use the word migrant again, Neelam, because I do believe that again we're sort of placing them in a context, and we need to debate the context of home. What does home mean? What does tradition mean? How is that attached to culture? What does craft therefore define and notify? What does architecture define and notify? And all of that, and I'm sure UNESCO could do a number of series. We certainly are doing that, whether it's with FICCI and British Council and with UNESCO and all of the many conferences, and we'll continue to do that. But these are issues that need to be very specifically addressed, because each is contentious, and it's not that what I'm saying is the truth. I mean, there are many truths, and perhaps that's what the arts does, right? It presents an opportunity for many truths to coexist at the same time without necessarily challenging each other or being in competition with each other. Where, as Neelam and Debanjan and Ananya and Tarun have all talked about, is finally what is so important to our world and our being is the fact that all 1.3 billion Indians today have a DNA stamped into their system, which is a cultural DNA. From cradle to grave, we dance and we sing our way, whether you have food in your stomach or not. You have access to culture and a syncretic tradition of culture, whether it's Buddhism or Jainism or Sikhism or Islam or Hinduism. And this is not today. This goes back millennia. We are all collectively from an animistic, from an animistic tradition, and thereafter the Vedas. And it was much later, perhaps only 1600 years ago, that you first look at the temple traditions coming. And I do believe that we need to set all of this in context when we're looking at culture. As you all have rightly said, 14 million people, 2% of global economy, etc. Numbers, as we've seen, we are supposed to be leading up to $5 trillion in our economy. In the last 5 years, we were on an ascendant growth, but unfortunately, it seems that much of that was smoke and mirrors, and none of that turned out to be true. Otherwise, if it was, perhaps our banks would not be in the situation that they are today, and the government would not say to us that hamara arthik sthiti mein problem hai. I'm sure that they have a problem in their arthik sthiti, but I'm surprised that for 5 years we were told or sold a completely different perspective. I think it's also valid to rule that we are not a developed country. At $2,500 per capita income, we cannot compete with the UKs, the USAs, the Europes, the Singapores, the Hong Kongs of the world in terms of putting out for the art sector some kind of support and some kind of help. So we know that. So let's forget for a second that we will look at government for any of this. Ananya, to come to your specific question now in context, can you all hear me? I'm sorry, I think my connection is unstable. In specific, so world over, perhaps you all know that $1 trillion of cancellations have happened across the cultural and creative and entertainment sector. And this is not true necessarily of India, it's necessarily across the world. Opening ceremonies, craft exhibitions, conferences, theater shows, music, restaurants. I mean, everything has come to a screeching halt. The issue, I think, as I think Ananya and Debanjan very rightly indicated, is so what does this sector entail? Our understanding of it is that when you're looking at the creative industry sector, and as you know, in FICCI, we've been doing a lot of work in that and with IMA, we believe that in the larger sense of creative industry, we're anything from 100 to 400 million people, which is not just the people who are creating the art, like a craft, as Neelam had indicated, that Debanjan had said, but everybody else, the dyer, the harvester, the person who spins the yarn. Everybody is part of this sector. So we know that 400 million agrarian people in the field between harvests are involved in some activity that contributes to the creative or the cultural industries. And we know that as a fact. We also know that 70 years down the road, we still don't have one ministry that has ever enumerated, as you all have rightly said, this picture. And we've been trying to push to the enumeration and the census agencies that can we do a census where we look at how many people are getting a primary or a secondary income from this larger creative industry sector, and therefore can we have a group of ministers who come together to be able to address it. Yes, it's manufacturing, yes, it's MSME, yes, it's culture and tradition, yes, it's textile, and it's a whole lot of other things, but it needs policy. The good thing, and there are, I mean, having said all of the bad stuff, let me come to some of the good stuff that has happened, and I'll spend perhaps the second part of it also coming to that. The good stuff is we have been able to drive some policy through. We have got the protocol for opening up for museums and for cultural spaces. 606 spaces have been opened up. We've put the protocol into place, and we're trying to do the same for theaters, etc. The issue at this point of time, as all of us know in this room, and we are, as usual, preaching to the converted, is that if an artist does not perform, or if an artisan doesn't sell, he or she doesn't eat. We are an insecure sector. We have no access to MSME loans, even whatever the new medical Abhi, whatever the program is, I forget for a second, because we've asked for that to be done. But in this sector, what we've said, and in the first task force, what I was really, I shouldn't be stunned because I listen to this a lot of the time. But what I was told is that artists ko kyun paise chahiye? Why do artists need money? They should be contributing to our funds. And so it took me aback, and I said, I thought the person was joking, and I said, say that again. And then I had to explain to them that not every artist was Shah Rukh Khan or Sonu Nigam or Anjali Ila Menon or M.F. Hussain, but it's the Ragi in the Gurdwara to the weaver in Maheshwar, the toy maker in Varanasi to the Thayyam person, the bowls of Calcutta to those working in Kumaratuli doing the Durga murtis or the people weaving, etc. All of them are part of the sector, and it was like a new dawn. Not that it made a difference, but in Rajasthan, for example, and Tarun will know this, we were in a day of making this presentation. They did put out a new rural artisan policy where everybody got whatever 1,000 rupees and you could access, and now we're trying to drive the zonal centers. We had told Nirupama go through, and then secretary, and now the new secretary Anand Kumar is, can we do three things? One, looking at what Pankaj is saying, can we open up government venues which are already paid for? Can you invite artists in there, and can you film them and put them on stream them live and pay them the money for their work? Similarly for training and products and so on and so forth. We've said, can all local, what are they called, the state handloom, state emporia, can they work to acquire works by artisans? Can the tribal folk museums acquire the works from Madhya Pradesh artisans? Can Bengal do the same thing? So, and all we are saying is you don't have to find a new scheme. No, you're not doing festivals, you've got some money left over. You're not doing a lot of the work that you've had to do for the last 3 months because of the sector being closed down. Use that money and do this in a way that is democratic and accesses and allows for the artisan to feel respected. Artisans and artists are not interested in getting a daan or for charity. It's not about charity. For the 30 years that somebody's thrown a pot, you create, a mug or a beautiful piece of pottery or whatever it is. But it's taken you 30 years to be able to, or whatever, or 13 years to hone your Bharatnatyam technique, or 20 years to weave that mystery. And yet, at the craft and artisan and artist sector, we are still expected to do everything free. The value proposition thereof, forget a Louis Vuitton or a Hermes, etc. The value proposition is not seen to be a value proposition. And therefore, what I do believe that all of us collectively have to do is look at advocacy, first and foremost. Look at building the value proposition for the arts and artisans and the cultural sector, and map. Make sure that we are able to put out the best, the not so great, and the emerging. Be able to train, upskill, and link all of this, whether it's with tourism, people like Tarun, or whether it's with Pankaj, people who work in the digital sector, or with policymakers, etc., like us in the room, or the Crafts Council of the world. We have to create bridges. We're not creating enough bridges. We're still all working in our little silos, thinking that we're going to be able to change the world. No, we can't. But collectively, together, we can perhaps make a difference. The sad thing is, till we do that, those artisans, those artists, those puppeteers, those magicians, those bowl singers, they go hungry. They don't eat. We continue to try and reach provisions to people, send out money, do fundraising, but the actuality out there is terrible. I mean, it's a tragedy.
Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you. It's a very important point that we must put people first. And in our country, we love Zakir Hussain and we love stars, but we don't have a mechanism to build stars. I think that is the biggest challenge. But this sector, offers the opportunity of developing into a star without formal education. If we can create that pathway, we have seen how people have turned into star. We have these master weavers, the singers and all, but we lack the mechanism, and that's where we all need to work to. Tarun, we have been asking questions, and one question is, what are some of the good practices? Now, I know in Rajasthan is one of the states where there has been some policy direction. One was already mentioned by Sanjay that, artists are being asked to do video recording and share. But my question to you is, what kind of new investment in skill development is needed for the tourism sector, to handle all the safety thing, and most importantly, to dispel this sense of fear, which Sanjay also pointed out. And now, because we are kind of running out of time, I'll give you only 2 minutes to talk.
new safety measures. If you talk about COVID, that's not difficult. COVID, surprisingly, is highly infectious. That is the danger. But if you talk about how to fight COVID, the 4 or 5 measures of maintaining good respiratory hygiene, maintaining washing your hands, keeping social distancing, which in itself is becoming a contentious term, these work. The perception is what we have to fight against, and the anxiety. There is an anxiety that my job may not last tomorrow, and the perception that if I go to a smaller place, it may not be as hygienic as a branded hotel. These are the two things that we have to fight. Training people to be safe and be hygienic, that's not the difficult part. That's what I think.
Thank you, Tarun. Pankaj, for the skill development you were mentioning, and you spoke of the guide. So you're talking of what we say, the value-added new jobs. That could be the innovation for tomorrow. So would you like to show something of your work?
So I'll quickly, I'll answer that question, but prior to that, I'll just quickly again recap. So we're working on immersive visitor experiences, which extend into cultural walks and trails, which are self-guided, and that's where we are collaborating with the community, getting them onboarded, and there's a school outreach program. I'll not spend more time there. I'll just play, for the clarity of the audience of how an AR experience really looks like. So this is just one sample that we did. So we are trying to evolve this model here with History Channel and Book My Show.
I'd like to ask Neelam that, how we talk of training our craftspeople, and we know this digital divide exists. So we get them to this level where they can use technology. And that's where, I guess our policymakers, programmers, planners, we need to influence them.
Yeah. Thanks, Ananya. I'll try to be quick. I'm going to be very positive now, because I think all of us do this because we see so much positivity. So basically, what struck us is that unless you will build more participatory ownership models with rural producers, it's like Amul. See, Amul is at $5 billion in revenue. It's owned by 3 million farmers. And today with technology, you can do a lot of distributed models. So basically, we are talking about using distributed manufacturing. You can do world-class manufacturing with 50 people in a village. Yes, there are bandwidth issues. We will sort those out. And we are working on something called the Platform for Inclusive Entrepreneurship. So essentially, Nandan has come up with this idea of 5 societal platforms. So post-Aadhaar, we have 1 billion Indians on biometric, right? And if we can build platforms for them that are owned by society. So these are not owned by private people. So these are societal platforms built on philanthropy. And so we are working on a platform for inclusive entrepreneurship, which encompasses farm and off-farm. I loved Sanjoy's points because you see, even our cotton farmers, we've got to look at farm to fashion value chains. What is Amul? Amul is milk to gourmet chocolate value chain. Basically, that's what it is, right? You can do the same, right? And that will be the foundation of your regenerative economies, right? Anyway, so a platform for inclusive entrepreneurship is being built. It's a platform co-op. So the platform itself is owned by everybody who comes on it. And the other thing about all these new age platforms is platforms become ghost towns unless they are built collaboratively. Collaboration happens through co-creation. After this call, I'm going to call up everybody else on this, and we are going to all try to co-create together, back to Sanjoy's point. So a clear example of this today is that all the funding in the world pre-COVID was not going to help us meet the SDGs till 2093. All the funding that was earmarked to meet the SDGs was going to help us meet the SDGs by 2093. So it became very clear to people pre-COVID that unless we change the way we worked, we are not going to see systems change in our lifetime. So I'm part of 2 very strong collaboratives. One is a global collaborative and one is Creative Dignity in India. So in Creative Dignity, around 250 young design entrepreneurs set up on WhatsApp group, and we are just trying to help them, guide them, And the work that has been done in 6 weeks by about 100 volunteers would have required $2 million of funding. Literally, I can tell you, with 2 years searching for that funding. It's all been done in 6 weeks. These people pushed out a diagnostic. We've got 2,000 organizations who answered the diagnostic with access to 2 lakh artisans. Done. Tuck, 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 through the network. So these are going to be the new ways we all need to work. We all need to co-create. We need to collaborate. And we need to have a lot of interoperability, right? And we can't always wait for the government. We will keep talking to the government. But in the meanwhile, this is, and I really believe once we get things up to a certain size and speed, that's when the government listens. Why does the government listen to the private sector? Why? Because they say, oh, we're creating so many jobs, we contribute so much to the GDP. So we've got to get ourselves into that situation. And then the government will listen. They'll do whatever. I mean, look at the IT industry. Look at the kinds of everything it got, right? Right? All of us have to speak in one voice. We all speak in disparate voices. So these are all part of the creative dignity agenda. Creative dignity does not belong to anybody. It belongs to everybody. So there's no one behind it.
Over to Devanjan. Devanjan, from your perspective, I'd like to hear your reflections on whatever we have discussed today.
Hi. I think I'll basically respond to some of the brilliant points that my fellow panelists have made. I think going back to the question that I think Neelam and others have asked about that data, I think because craft sector is quite intergenerational in nature and community based, I think that data is always going to be a little bit difficult to pin down with great degree of certainty. These are Crafts Council of data that I was basically quoting from. But again, in our own research across the creative industry sector, we find that good data is very difficult to come by. So it will be one of the things that I would set out to all colleagues and partners here, that we gather data in a way that's quite safe to work with and are clinical in nature. I think the great point about I think creative industries as a whole, and when we look at the whole ecosystem, including travel and tourism, is it is a fantastic way of a much greater equitable distribution of income. And I think this is something that we should really hold on to as we plan for the future and exit from this crisis. Also, what we have seen, especially in Bengal, with the COVID crisis as well as the massive cyclone that hit us, is that the crafts sector, particularly Sanjay mentioned Kumartuli, Durga Pujo artisans, I mean, it's the destruction has been unimaginable. So I think there needs to be safety mechanisms that we draw up for that sector in particular. And I think I'll end by saying that there are significant opportunities in this crisis. We have seen that from the education side of our work, that we have made digital technology work in ways we have never imagined earlier. So and we have made use of appropriate technology. It's not always high-end, massive data intensive stuff. I think I did hear the mention of WhatsApp, and this is something that's working very well in our teacher education side of things, in our training programs. So I think there are some opportunities there for us to rethink and reimagine the nature of our engagement with the creative industries, craft sector, as we try and work out an exit strategy.
Sanjay, what I would like to hear from you is, what we can see is that there is a need of, cross-sectoral collaboration and partnerships. And you have been talking to ICCR, you've been talking to the government, you're part FICCI. So I would like to hear from you, how we can make this movement stronger. There's need for working capital support for these businesses to stay afloat. So I'd like to hear from you.
You're absolutely right. If we had finances to, kickstart these kind of sectors, it'll be great. But as we don't, let's forget it. Let us look at the strengths that each of us have, and what is the resource that we can bring to the table. It can be in cash, in kind, in communication, and try and see what are the 2 or 3 things that each of us can do collectively that will feed back to us. If we can help, for example, Tarun, source the best merchandise into the Arya Nivases, or the best performers, and they used to have performances every evening, for example. Well, why not? Tarun would welcome that. If we can upskill people, or if Pankaj can help using technology, bring some of this sector together. I mean, with UNESCO, for example, with Art Matters, we just went ahead and started the advocacy program. We sent out an email to Eric saying, are you happy to partner? Said that to ICCR, said it to Ministry of Culture. Ministry of Culture had a heart attack thinking that, if they partners with us, they will be seen to be, they will perhaps not be so appreciated in the ministry. So they didn't agree, but the others did. So let's get on with it. My issue is that we can, of course, carry on like the SDGs, and you referred to it, like the SDGs carrying on saying 2020, 2020, 2000, 2020, 2090. And we know that every 20 years or 25 years or 10 years, when the countries meet, they've done very little. And the resources that were deputed for that may have also been used, but perhaps not appropriately. So until and unless the much pilloried, non-government sector, and I'm saying non-government sector in the broadest form, which is for-profit and not-for-profit, come together and say, like it used to be, like trade used to be, I'll give you a banana, will you give me, biscuits? Or I'll give you biscuits, will you give me a piece of cloth? And see what we can do. No, it won't, it may not result in much, but let's start. And we've seen it work. And as you said, Ananya, even at Salam Balak Trust, you create platforms. Our street kids today were in the arts, have, traveled the world. Their works are in museums. They've performed in every possible place. Of course they will. You give people in India a platform and, they will send a rocket to space. And we've seen that.
Julie, would you like to add your comments to this?
For me, this today's webinar was very, very interesting, because I think we all very much grassrooted and also very frank about this sector's nature. This sector, the creative sector, which was indicated by Neelam as creative manufacturing, was in reality already one of the most vulnerable sector. Not only in India, but I think in all other countries, the same situation. And artists, they were already very much vulnerable, and their status were already very much precarious one than the other sectors. So what is clear for me is, of course, we can't change this nature immediately, but through Neelam and through the comment and proposal from Sanjay, there are still things that we can do and that we can put forward to private institute and to the government. So because I think we have, this is incredible crisis, but at the same time, it brings us incredible challenge, because I'm sure it's not only us, but many of us all over the world brainstorm together how to build resilience. So what I would like to propose now is, of course, it's just a good idea. And perhaps we very much would like to convene another kind of brainstorm meeting, and maybe not a public webinar, but between us, in order to kind of come out with an action plan in a way that all our webinar is not just disappear. Of course, it's very interesting debate and need to provide lots of food, but I think we have to put something together concrete. So this is something that, of course, one of the objective of all this webinar from UNESCO is because UNESCO is conducting, would like to compile a report on the analysis of the impact of the COVID-19 in the creative sector and cultural sector. But I think at the same time, it would be maybe very interesting and very fruitful to have some action plan brainstormed, put forth by all of you, and then share with, I don't know, Niti Aayog and of course Ministry of Cultures and Craft, I mean, all the stakeholders, because all the food you have shared with us will be very valuable, the basic ground for them, because as you also said, this is a huge sector, but it does not seem to be acknowledged as a huge sector which can contribute to the sustainable development. So this is something I want to share with you, and then I mean, we should get in touch in order to continue this work together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. May I borrow just 5 more minutes of your time from all the panelists and ask our attendees if we can take 1 or 2 questions?
So nice of you, ma'am. I am very happy that the seminar was very good. और आज का जो ये सेमिनार हुआ, जो आज की वर्कशॉप हुई है, ये बहुत बढ़िया है, बहुत कुछ सीखने को मिला है। जैसे यूनेस्को काफ़ी काम कर रहा है, बाकी सभी पैनलिस्ट बहुत अच्छा काम कर रहे हैं। कोविड-19 में यही है कि जो लोकल आर्टिस्ट हैं हमारे यहाँ पर, जो विलेज लेवल पर हैं, उनको प्रॉब्लम तो है, उनको काम नहीं मिल रहा, काम है ही नहीं, क्या करें वो। तो उनके लिए यही है कि आप कुछ ऐसा रास्ता निकालें, जैसे बोल रहे थे, मैम भी बोल रहे थे कि हमने एक स्ट्रेटजी बनाई है कि हमने कुछ एनजीओज को, कुछ एसोसिएशंस को साथ में लिया है। तो आप बहुत अच्छा कर रहे हैं और कुछ इन लोगों के लिए हो पाए तो मैं आपका थैंकफुल रहूँगा।
Okay, I don't see any other raised hands, so we'll end the session today. But before that, you know, the key words, I think we're talking of new paradigms, and the key words which emerged in today's distriction are, you know, value addition and collaboration, putting people first, and innovation. I'd like to invite all the panelists to share 1 or 2 words, just 1 or 2 words on the new paradigms.
Empathy.
I'll go for brave.
I said opportunity.
Yes.
For the entire domain.
I'll go for resilience. Just hang in there.
Restart tourism, restart action, and I think what we need to get over is the fear. I think that's the most important thing, because this is a new normal and life has to carry on, as was said by our folk singers also. So we have to work in a different way. With that, I thank all of you. Neelam had to leave because she has another webinar upcoming. So I thank Neelam, I thank Debanjan, Tarun, Sanjay, Pankaj, and I thank Juhi for initiating this South Asia webinar. Juhi approached us to have this series on ICH and creative industries. So thank you, Julie, for giving Bangla Natak the opportunity to collaborate with you. I thank Smita, Soumya, Ajay for all the technical help they gave. And of course, I thank my colleagues also who supported. So with all these thanks, I'd like to close today. But as we said, this is not the end, and we'll carry on the conversation.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you to all of you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.